Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Toxic to Triumph. I'm your host, Matthew Phifer, and I have on Lindsey Ellison. And Lindsey and I connected on Instagram, and she's an absolute powerhouse. She is a relationship coach. She is a breakup to breakthrough coach. She helps people who are going through a breakup in a toxic relationship, very similar to what I do, which is the reason why her and I connected. And every time we've talked to each other, even if it was just through DMs, and then here recently about the podcast, it seems like we are right along the same lines. And so, Lindsey, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate all the work that you do, all the things that you've done. If I could toss it over to you, and if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Hey, everyone. So glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me on your show and doing the great work that you're doing. I got into coaching around 9 years ago. I was married to, back then I didn't know what the problem was. We were together for 17 years. And I learned, a long story short, and learn more about my information on my website, but I was married to a narcissist, and I didn't know what that word meant. Mm-hmm. I had two little kids at the time, I had two boys, 4 and 7, and it was one of the hardest things to escape that marriage. It was abusive, yet there was no physical abuse. It was the hardest thing to pinpoint. And it really wasn't until I broke free. And that's really what that's what it felt like, having to plan this escape for many months before I did it. And here I have two little boys and I had to move. And it was one of the scariest, hardest things I've ever done. Once I got out, I actually have a journalism degree. So I, was always in marketing and communications and PR, but I kind of just went and dusted off my old journalism roots. And I really just started to try to understand what the hell happened and what was going on. And I remember going to the bookstore and seeing maybe 1 or 2 books on narcissists or toxic relationship. Literally this was around 10 years ago. So things have really changed since then. Yeah. But I just almost fell to the floor and I said, oh my gosh, this is what I've gone through. Mm-hmm. So I decided to start a blog and start writing about it from my perspective, as well as, from a journalism research point of view, and then understanding about codependency and what that is and how does it happen and why does it happen. And at the time, I was really focused on helping people get out of those relationships. I don't do that so much anymore, in terms of, I work with you once you're out, but back then that's what I was doing. And then I started a podcast and then my blog started, I got picked up on Huffington Post all the years ago. And then some of the posts went viral, and then it almost felt like overnight I was starting to coach and help people. And since then, I've written a book called Magic Words, How to Get What You Want from a Narcissist. So that has really been kind of the early focus of my work, is helping people identify narcissistic abuse and codependency within themselves, as well as dealing with most of my clients at the time when I wrote the book. They were co-parenting with some kind of high conflict, whether it was borderline, whatever disorder the person had. But it's typically narcissism that my work has been focused on. And I recognize that so many people don't have the tools to manage a high conflict person. So I wrote this book called Magic Words to give you the tools to figure out how to manage and talk to and co-parent or deal with a narcissistic mother or even a coworker or someone who is high conflict, and really helping people shift their lens on how they see this person, because everyone sees someone like that as very threatening and very scary. But they're not. They're just very broken people. And so my work is to help people shift and see that you're actually the strong one and they're the weaker ones, and to really start to get the power back and try to end the power struggle within. So I've written that book. And then since then, my work has really been focused over the past year developing an online course that I have called Breakup to Breakthrough. And the joy that I get, that I love about my work and the passion, is to really show people that a breakup is the best thing that could ever happen to you. And all we do is typically feel the pain and shame and guilt around that particular emotion or that particular event. But I always say that a breakup is like a holy grail of your truth. You just have to go find it and figure out where it is. And that's where I help people get to.
One of the things that sticks out to me and I don't think that people understand that, because for me, it was several years ago as well, on multiple different levels. And I had Tina Swithin on
Oh,
a
yeah.
handful of months ago. And her and I said the same thing that I'm about to say to you, that because I want the audience to understand like what you actually went through when you got out. There wasn't people talking about this on Instagram back then. There wasn't a TikTok. There wasn't a Matt Phifer coaching. There wasn't a LindseyEllison.com. There wasn't, Tina may have been around, but she was still learning herself as well. So as they say, when we were going through it, we got it from the mud. We actually had to really actually grind it out. There wasn't Google and things like that were around, but the information wasn't on there, and the coaches weren't around. And so we really actually had to get it the hard way. And so can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the struggles or let me rephrase, because we all need a support system when we're actually getting out, and we all need that validation that we're looking for. And to talk a little bit more about how you found that validation when, I'm sure, just like a lot of other people, your family may have said, no, just work it out. You guys have kids, stay married, or what was your experience like with that?
Ugh. Yeah. So when we are in a toxic relationship, I'd say 99% of those of us who are in one have dealt with some kind of trauma in our life before we even entered that relationship. So personally, I had a lot of childhood trauma, which I'm very open in talking about. But my mother died when I was 6 years old, and I was in a car accident with her. So losing my mother was, of course, traumatic. But after that, so my dad was single, and this was in the early 80s. There was no care.com. So I had a lot of nannies that came in and out of my life, which I think was more traumatic of them coming in and out of my life than my mother dying. But if you put those two things together, I had a lot of abandonment issues. And then my father, and I love him, but he has a lot of narcissistic traits as well. So he wasn't a very nurturing man, not very empathetic, and he was a very disengaged parent. So I grew up really being alone and just needing love so much. So when we go through any kind of trauma like that, the way we handle it as little kids is we actually go into fantasy mode. We have to, because there's no other choice. We don't get to choose to leave the house. We don't get to choose our parents. We don't get to choose anything that's decided for us. So by default, we turn into fantasy. We then, what another word is called thought distortions. We have distorted thinking. That distorted thinking throughout, ages 0 to 18 is what helps us cope. But by the time we're, 16 to 18, we've already started some really distorted thinking that's starting to affect our relationships and even in friendships that we've had. And then we start to get romantic partners where the distorted thinking is, this person feels so good, I'm going to ignore the red flags because we've been trained and conditioned to have fantasies already about our life. So when we go into this distorted thinking, when we're in the relationship, we don't want to see those red flags, nor do we understand abuse. And oftentimes, the person who we have a toxic relationship with often mirrors the parent that wounded us the most.
Yep. We mirror our childhood parents.
Exactly. And I have so many clients that come up to me and say, well, Lindsey, my childhood was pretty great. I had a really great childhood. But when I start to really peel back the layers, your childhood might have, and my childhood was good. I mean,
Mhm.
everything was met. You would have never guessed of what was really going on behind the scenes. But trauma is defined as anything less than nurturing.
Mhm.
So just because your parents were decent doesn't mean that they were giving you exactly what you needed,
Right.
you know,
Mhm.
and over time that can create a lot of wounds. So when we get into a romantic relationship, we are subconsciously trying to resolve those wounds through another person
Mhm.
because we never have learned the skills to resolve it and self-parent ourselves. So we typically look for partners who are, you know, happen to mirror, which are narcissistic. We're the codependent going into
Mhm.
this relationship. We don't even know those words. We don't even understand it at the
Right.
time. But when we go into those relationships, we subconsciously look for those stronger personalities who can maybe parent us, guide us, soothe us, give us all the dopamine we're not able to produce for ourselves growing.
Yep. Mhm.
So to answer your question, when I was going through that, those thought distortions it was just this clouded, foggy mind. However, my gut told me I had to get out.
Mhm.
And that is what I saw, where I, get real spiritual and I say that is your higher power talking to you.
Mhm.
I say God. I'm not a religious person by any means. And I always like to say the G word always throws people off, and I don't want
Mhm.
that because I'm
Yep.
more of a spiritual person. But that the feeling of I will be fine if I'm going to get out of this relationship and I'll figure it out.
Mhm.
Now, the wonderful thing is those who go through trauma are very resilient people, and we forget that. So
Mhm.
I have gone through so many things. Somewhere along the lines, I'm like, I can do this again. I
Mhm.
can figure this out.
Right.
So when I got out, and so when you get out of the toxicity, which is what I did, that is where I had more clarity around the
Mhm.
situation.
How long did it take for
Um,
you to get to clarity, a clarity moment? For a lot of people, it takes a little bit because you're still kind of in that fog. I know a lot of people, when they first leave, you're still kind of in that fog, kind of in that daze, like, what the hell happened? Right. Just kind of,
yeah.
you know,
So, well, there's two. What I failed to mention is that I actually got after my second husband. After my first husband, I met my second husband.
mhm.
Got married to him.
Mhm.
We have just ended our relationship a year ago. He's not a narcissist. It wasn't anything like that, but it was interesting. It was a different level of toxicity,
Yeah.
and we could talk about that as a coach, having had an established business, and
Mhm.
here I am getting divorced
Mhm.
again.
Mhm.
Can you imagine the shame I felt around that?
Yeah.
But I'm very, very open about it now because I learned so much from that process.
Right.
But the for me, the second husband, I still very much had feelings for him and I was very much in love with him still,
Mhm.
but I knew it just wasn't healthy. So there's two different kinds of breakups. When you're done and you just need to get the hell out and you're like escaping from them, which
Right.
was my first marriage, versus another relationship of me needing to end it, but still having feelings for them. That latter experience was way harder,
Mhm.
because that is when you still have feelings for this person. You can get sucked back into this addictive, distorted thinking that they really are the best things for you.
One
I
of the
just
things,
wanted to bifurcate those
yeah,
two situations.
absolutely. One of the things you mentioned is that the second one was still toxic, even though the person wasn't narcissistic, and that's something I talk about all the time.
Mm,
That I want people to understand, and that for a handful of reasons. Number one, because a lot of people come to me and they say, well, I'm starting to feel like narcissism is overused and things like that. And I agree with people that it is.
I agree.
However, it does not mean that the relationship that you're in is not toxic. And it also doesn't, and just because it's toxic, doesn't mean that you or the other person are narcissistic. What are some other ways that, why would there, with no narcissist present in the relationship,
Mm,
how can it be toxic? How is that even possible?
yeah. Well, it's you can both be codependent.
Mhm.
That's actually even scarier.
Yep.
So it's not the
I
coda
agree.
narc dynamic, it's two
Yep.
codas working together.
Yep.
And so what you end up doing is you end up having a co-addiction to each
Mhm.
other. So how do I mean by that? Where you are, so codependency is something I talk a lot about in my work, about this notion of carried shame, carried pain. So as codependents in our early childhood, we look at said parent and they're upset with something and we feel responsible for their mood.
Yep.
Okay. That's a boundary distortion. Okay. That's what's called carried pain or carried shame. So we feel shameful or painful over someone else's crap going on in their life. So when we're in a relationship, we can do the same thing. So what was happening with my partner was that he was going through a lot of stuff in his life, nothing to do with me, but I felt very responsible for making it better. And when I wasn't making it, and oh, hey, I'm a coach, I know everything, right? So when that wasn't, let's say, fixing itself, then I would pull away. So what our toxicity was, and we've mentioned this before we went live here on recording, was this whole, what I call LALA. It's called love avoidance and love addiction. That is one of the most toxic dances a couple can have. And you do not have to be a narcissist to be a love avoidant. Because the love addict can also be a love avoidant. Okay, so how that works is, and in my situation, and I never saw this until I worked on my own stuff, but I really think I was more of a love addict, where I still came into that marriage not knowing, had no idea of having a lot of void and so much pain, unresolved pain in my life that I didn't know about.
Right. I just want to make sure I'm clear with the audience. For those of you who are listening to Lindsey, what she's describing could also be attributed to what, especially if you follow me, the anxious avoidant trap. So the language I use, same thing, what she's describing, everything's identical except anxious avoidant attachment styles. So I'm not big on terminology, but want to make sure I care less about vocabulary, as long as everyone knows what everyone knows what we're talking about. So
so the love addict is both have boundary distortions, but the love addict typically has more. So they will just need all this love. The love avoidant can never give it, but the love avoidant is also afraid of abandonment. So what will happen is that the love addict will just reach their point of like, I'm not getting this, then they pull away. And the love avoidance, like, oh wait, I don't want you to pull away because that scares me. So then they become the love addict, and they'll do everything they can to get you back. And then a lot of people see in this cycle, when the love avoidant gets the love addict back, there's some equanimity that has been established that can last for a couple weeks, couple months, or whatever, and everything feels really great. But what's happening is the cycle's about to start again. So the love avoidant and the love addict feels really whole and complete, and that's where the co-addiction happens, where they feel, when the equanimity has been established, it feels so damn good that you have the best relationship, and oh my God, I'm so lucky, and everyone else should be jealous of my relationship, and so both of you are experiencing a distorted level of thinking that everything's fine. So typically, in my situation, the toxicity was then the cycle would start over again, and then there'd be this pulling away again, and nothing to do with me. But I then would feel very, very responsible, so afraid of him leaving or our relationship ending. Over time, we start to lose sight of who we are and what's important to us. So some key indicators are losing sight of self-care. So, not exercising, eating too much, drinking too much, not being able to focus on work, and obsessive thinking. Wondering what's happening, a lot of fear that's happening. And then when the relationship is getting back and the cycle is kind of at that equanimity stage, you start to lose sight of your friends.
Mhm.
You don't want to be around anyone for fear of, so it's just this, that's a kind of an example of the toxicity is sometimes too much love, too much
Yeah.
intensity in a
Mhm.
relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's a good word.
Mhm. And eventually what ends up creeping in is, because I talk about codependency a lot, because I think it's, especially people who are in a toxic relationship, they're so focused on the narcissist, especially with narcissism being overused as much as it is. They're so focused on the other person, not even realizing that even that you're exhibiting some codependent traits. Like, how do I fix the narcissist? How do I get them in therapy? How do I get them to do this? How do I get them to do that? Will they ever change? Not even realizing that you are actually not changing yourself through this entire process.
Right.
And also not realizing that you, as the person who's struggling with codependency, that you're setting all these high lofty expectations for the other person, and when they don't change, because you have no power over them anyway, and you are actually not, you're actually engaging a lot of unhealthy boundaries as well, thinking that caring too much about what they think and what they feel, not respecting their boundaries in terms of their thoughts, allowing for them to think and feel and accepting their behavior for what it is, and not realizing that all of that, because you ultimately don't get what you're looking for from it, leads to resentment, which that's one of the number one killers of relationships, is that resentment. And what it's coming from is this place of inauthenticity, that you are literally willing to sacrifice who you are, your own authenticity, to try to please and change this person,
Mhm.
which then when they don't, now all of a sudden, boom, the resentment comes. How could you ever do this to me? How could you, and now all of a sudden, even if this person isn't narcissistic, right now, all of a sudden we still have a problem, which is it just sounds like is what you're describing.
Yes, and resentment is one of the key indicators of being a victim,
Mhm.
and it's a victim mindset, and
Yep.
we don't see it that way, right? But
No.
it's how it's the, this has been done to me. How
Mhm.
could you do this to me,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Rather than being accountable for
Mhm.
your role and your uh, part of the relationship,
Yep. Mhm.
and and even myself, I didn't even see it. So when
Yep.
you're in it, I mean, that's why you really need a coach and someone to help you,
Mhm.
guide you through this stuff, because when you're in it, you really can't see it.
Well, there's no way you would see it. It's from childhood, right? So now,
Yes.
now it's in your subconscious. Going back to what you're talking about, right? And so with people who, like you said, everyone who's experienced this, they start to realize they go down this journey with all these light bulbs that are starting to go off. That like, oh shoot, I remember all this stuff in childhood, and I'm now starting to see how these pieces actually fit together. And you start, and so it's ingrained into your subconscious. So the reason why you would need a coach or therapist is because you are so used to doing that
Right.
you don't even realize that what you're doing until someone brings it up, and someone can start to pinpoint and start to kind of touch on some of these pain points of yours.
Yeah. The other thing too is, and I don't think many, I don't know if you talk about this, but a lot of people don't recognize that codependency is seen as an addiction.
Mhm.
There's a 12-step group for it's coda.org,
Mhm.
right? Um, when I started to recognize that, and this was, about a little over a year ago, when I was really recognizing that, and this is where I was able to really forgive myself, because I've been talking about codependency for so long, leading up to the end of my marriage. Uh, and I really thought I had it under control. I
Mhm.
thought I graduated from it,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
What I recognize, you can relapse.
Mhm.
And just like you can relapse with alcohol, you can relapse with codependency.
Yep.
So what I learned in the work that I've done is coda is, we call it, so alcoholics have a drinking problem,
Mhm.
codas have a thinking problem.
Mhm.
I
Yep.
love that,
Mhm.
because when you start to recognize that your thinking is your illness,
Yep.
is your disease, where does that come from? It goes back to what I was talking about before, is when we have issues growing up, that distorted thinking is what got us through to survive.
Right.
So we still have a distorted sense of thinking. When we are triggered, codependency can just surface.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it can be dormant for a while. You can have everything under control, life is good, but then you'll start to see it creeping up again. And that's where it's really good to have, whether it is a 12-step group, or, you know, if you're going down that path, you've got sponsors, you have a, you know, or you have a coach,
some
or
sort of level of accountability.
Yeah.
You know, because with it being subconscious, you just don't, you need, just like if someone were, if you struggled with staying healthy and staying active, a lot of people would hire a trainer. What are they doing? They're holding you accountable, right? And
I use that all the time.
Yeah.
I use that exact analogy. Yeah.
You have to understand, and it's okay. That's a part of being self-aware, to understand your weaknesses. People who follow me know that I'm very open about my struggles with ADHD. I'm unorganized. I understand that I can be organized for a period or a few moments, but I have to understand and I have to realize and accept the fact that it will always be a weakness of mine. So therefore, I need certain levels of accountability, whether it be a person, whether it be a system, but something that's going to hold me accountable. Because no one's going to, you know, if I were an hour late to this, no one's going to say, well, it is because he has ADHD. You know, that's not going to happen. Right. Eventually you would walk away, you would, you know, so we have to, just like you said it, you know, I say it all the time. We have to be responsible for our own deficiencies.
Yeah, being accountable. And so in the work that I do in my program, I actually help clients create a trigger mitigation plan. It's kind of like, if you're trying to lose weight and you're in the beginning of a program, let's say a 30-day weight loss challenge or whatever, you know, during that time, you might get easily triggered. So you're not going to go to a Super Bowl party where there's all this stuff. You're going to prepare to eat before, or you're going to bring your own healthy snack, right? Because you know that you might be triggered in wanting to eat, and then your diet is off. Or, you know, you're not going to go to the coffee shop that has all these baked goods. You're going to go through the drive-through so you don't smell all the baked goods, let's say. Those are how we mitigate our triggers. And it's where we accept that that's just the way we're wired. And over time, if you're creating enough neuroplasticity in your brain, you will no longer be easily triggered anymore. That's how people keep the weight off, or that's how an alcoholic can be in a bar and not drink. But that doesn't happen right in the way. So when you are leaving a toxic relationship, and you're trying to move on with your life, especially if you're co-parenting, that's a huge group of my, you know, huge part of my audience is those who have left and they're constantly getting triggered with this person texting them. And then they go in through, they have literally what, you know, when we are triggered, especially if we've been in a traumatic or toxic relationship, our central nervous system has pinned that said text message as a threat to our survival. So we go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. So again, that's another example of a distorted thinking. So the way I explain it is that when an ex is texting you, or you're trying to get out and your nervous system is going crazy, we process it as they are a bear at our front door, and our door's almost unlocked, and they're going to come in and kill us, right? I mean, we really do have those survival emotions, and we all know what they are. It's when you know, our heart is beating fast, we're sweating, we're scared, we shut down, we can't focus. That is our central nervous system getting ready for an attack, right? Where I help people, and you know, I'm sure you do the same, is I say it's not a bear, it's just a squirrel. They're nuisances, they're annoying, they're there, but you see it as a squirrel, and that's it. It's I
don't know if you I stole this from the book The Wizard of Oz and Other Narcissists. It's very similar to The Wizard of Oz. Yet you think that this person is this big figurehead with flames thrown out that's being demanding and things like that, and then you find out it's just a man behind a curtain. That's it. Right. Exactly. It's just a regular person, just like you are, that doesn't hold all this. There's not this all-knowing, all-powerful wizard that you thought this was. It's literally just a man behind a curtain. And what what Dorothy found out is that she had the power the entire time. She actually didn't even need to go to him. And so that's what, that's what, for you, this is a squirrel, but we're saying another thing that we're saying the same thing. We have different analogies, which is cool.
Yeah, we all have different, and that's why I always say, this is why I love talking with other coaches. Even, years ago when I got started, I would never talk to a coach who's doing the same thing, right?
Mhm.
But I recognize that we all have to hear it differently.
Yep.
In different ways from different coaches and different experts, and
Absolutely.
what you might say and what I might say might just resonate differently with different people. But that's really where I came up with the word magic words, my book.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
magic is an acronym. So it's the process in which you are going to engage when you have to engage
Mhm.
with a narcissist or high conflict. The first one is mapping,
Mhm.
M for mapping their fears and insecurities. No, sorry, mapping their persona.
Mhm.
And then A is assessing their fears and insecurities. So mapping their persona is this whole list of questions of mapping where their childhood is from.
Mhm.
What's their relationship with mom and dad? And getting to really the root behind, the person behind the mask of
Right.
the scariness, and assessing their fears and insecurities. Anyone who's a narcissist or a bully,
Mhm.
let's take the N word out for a second.
Right.
A bully,
Right.
anyone who's a bully is afraid.
Right.
And when we can start to see that these people are afraid
Mhm.
and that they are damaged, how do you argue with someone who's really scared? You can't,
No.
because you can then have empathy, what I call empathy with boundaries. You can have empathy for them. Now, yes, they might be making your life a living hell, and there's no doubt that they do that.
Right.
But we've got to be able to see them with a different lens and stop saying they're making our life a living hell. They're trying to make our life a living hell.
Right.
That's the difference.
Exactly. Can you talk? Let's circle back to, you were talking about how in your relationship, and I know for a lot of other people, their abusive relationship was not physical,
Mhm.
right? And so I think that, I always talk about disagreeable versus unacceptable. Everybody knows that physical abuse is unacceptable. When we start getting into this whole situation where a lot of it is verbal, emotional, mental abuse, and especially for those people who, and I'm sure you went through it, where you're trying to find that validation, and people will say things like, well, at least it wasn't physical. Well, at least they're not hitting you. At least they're not doing this. And well, just don't let the words bother you. Don't let them bother you with this. Don't let them, and they just seem to downplay it, especially when there's a spiritual component. I don't know if you were involved in any type of spirituality in your relationship, but it seems to, for people who are involved in the church or things like that, seems to be another big component when it's mental and emotional abuse. Can you talk a little bit about that, either from your personal experience or professional experience?
Yeah. So again, I learned through all the work that I've done is that there are actually 5 kinds of abuse. The 2 we get, right? Physical and sexual, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think that's what people identify as abuse.
Yeah.
But there's other nuanced abuse. It is emotional,
Hmm.
intellectual,
Hmm.
and spiritual. And spiritual does not have to fall under a religious-based institution. It does,
Right.
but spiritual abuse is literally, think of it as it's abusing your spirit and
Hmm.
who you are as a person,
Hmm.
and being put down, being told that whoever you are as a person is wrong,
Hmm.
and that you're wrong, and then
Hmm.
and so with the intellectual, it's I learned that actually through going through the work that I did personally, was more intellectual and spiritual abuse were the top things in my childhood.
Hmm.
I mean, for me to have said that my childhood had abuse, you would never even guess it.
Right.
And then what happened is those 2 forms of abuse kept appearing in my relationships.
Hmm.
So those are the more nuanced abuse. So intellectual, I know from growing up is, or maybe this fell under spiritual. So one of the things I know as a kid, I loved to dance, and I was very much into the arts. And my father was more of a right brain guy. What's
Hmm.
the creative left brain? But he was more into finance and money. right? And I was really wanting to be an actor, dancer. I was very into the arts, play the piano. I did all of that stuff. And I would always want to show my dad the stuff that I was working on. And he would say, and this was something that has grained into my head for years, he would say, Lindsey, why do you always have to be in the spotlight? That's spiritual abuse, because this was who I was.
Yeah.
And I was exhausting to him. I was a burden to him. And I remember crumbling and thinking that all those beautiful aspects of my spirit, a healthy parent would nurture and foster and help grow and help this child discover more aspects of that, those elements. He didn't. So I actually ended up getting, as I got older, I got a huge phobia of speaking and being on the spotlight.
Right.
Because I was told that it was wrong.
Right.
And I know somewhere subconsciously as a child, I thought if I'm in the spotlight, I won't get love. Right. And as children, we say, if I won't get love, then I won't be fed. So there really is a survival emotion that happens there.
Absolutely. And especially when you had, you described your father as, and at the very least, having narcissistic tendencies. And what's really actually happening is that person doesn't want you having the spotlight because the spotlight's not on them. Is one of the real issues. Ding. And then, but then when we also talk about, because when we fast forward and you talked about adulthood, what I tell people is that our thought process, our brain does not register negative thoughts. The negative thoughts that we do have come from people criticizing us. When we're born a blank slate. No one is born and saying to himself, I'm terrible. I can't do this. I don't want the spotlight. I don't want to sing. I don't want to do this. I'm not capable of these things, or things like Imposter Syndrome. We're not born with those things. They're created by dealing with people who are critical in our life, possibly toxic or narcissistic parents.
Yep, exactly. So for instance, I remember my first marriage, we went to some networking party that was my company for my professional, not his. And I was doing my thing. I was always very outgoing. And then we got in the car and he said, boy, did you make a fool of yourself tonight? Which I know I didn't, but he was threatened by me. He was threatened that I might be more one-upping and making him feel really insecure.
Right.
So that's spiritual abuse.
Yeah.
Intellectual abuse obviously is you trying to do your own thing and being told that it's never good enough, and you're not smart enough. I'm thinking of my childhood. I was a big writer, and I would write these papers in high school, and my dad would always mark them up excessively. Yeah. And because he always wanted to prove that he was a better writer than I was. Even when I launched my book, this is like 3 years ago, I launched my book. He said he couldn't even read it because he was afraid of seeing mistakes.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm like, no wonder, Dad. The reason why I married the people I married is because of that, and I have made major peace with him. And in fact, I have actually so much empathy for him because of his childhood and what he went through, and it all gets passed down generation to generation to generation. Yeah. But I wanted to kind of go back to what you're saying about when you were born, because I talk about that. So when we're born perfect. Yeah. And I always say that if you ever look at a baby, it doesn't even have to be yours. No. You just stare at this baby. And I think it's because it's the embodiment of the perfect soul, the perfect spirit. And we can just, we're drawn towards this baby because they're just so perfect.
They're innocent.
We're still that person. What happens is we grow up 2-3 years old, we're starting to learn things. Yeah. And so the way I like to compare it is that the brain is like a database of past events, and ego is the chief operating officer of those events. And will always make sure that you don't forget them. Yeah. Right. And what we have to do is come back with spirit to going back to the person we were born to be, our creator, and recognize that we are exactly that person we were when we were born. The only thing is we don't think so is because of ego, and ego is like, nope, nope. So for instance, I'm going into this new relationship, let's say, and I'm dating, and wow, this person seems really awesome. Ego says, no, no, no. Remember what happened last time.
Yep. Try to protect yourself based on that data you're talking about.
Exactly. And over time, your operating system gets infected with malware. That's what I always say.
Yeah.
And so when your computer gets infected with malware, you go into the operating system, which is what I call your belief system. And your belief system is what? Short for BS, right?
Yeah,
which most of it is crap, right?
Yeah.
So that's that whole realm of distorted thinking that we have. And how do you balance it? A lot of people ask, well, Lindsey, I don't know what's up or down anymore. You know, I mean, what is the true thought? And that's really where you have to develop a daily practice of listening to that voice and doing a scan and understanding like where is your spirit? Where is that perfect child inside of you versus what's ego? And I always say it's pretty easy. Anything that's negative in your brain, that's ego. When you're telling yourself that you're stupid, to watch out, anything that's fear is ego. Anything that love is your spirit.
Absolutely. Lindsey, this was absolutely amazing. You know, we're definitely gonna have to link up again because this is absolutely amazing. But before we go, if you can tell people how to find you, where your you know, tell us about your podcast. I think I got acquainted with your podcast several years ago. It's an absolutely amazing podcast. But tell people how to find you, and then also if you could just kind of close us out with, you know, something, you know, kind of your closing thoughts or something that you may consistently tell people, or something, mantra or something that you kind of live by.
Yeah. First, I'm at lindseyellison.com, LindseyEllison.com. You'll see when you get onto my website, there'll be an opt-in to my Blessings of a Breakup. You'll get a new lesson every day that really helps you keep yourself grounded with whatever higher power that connects with you. If you don't have a higher power, it's time to get one, because if you're in a toxic relationship, you've made someone else your higher power. So it's about getting it grounded there. My podcast is Unbreakable You, How to Break Up Without Being Broken. And I'm on every channel. I've not done TikTok. You're way braver than I am. I'm also on Instagram handle at Lindsey_Ellison. I also have a webinar that you'll see. I have a free webinar that you can access off of Instagram. And of course, my book, Magic Words, How to Get What You Want from a Narcissist, is on Amazon. I have it on Audible, Kindle, book, etc. And I think those are all the major channels to find me. And then something pithy to close it out. I don't know. You know, it's kind of just what I was just saying about, you know, if the relationship is feeling bad, it's bad. Your reality does not have to be the same as someone else's reality. And that's a boundary distortion if your partner is trying to make your reality his or her reality. Okay. So reality is a really important word that I use in recovery. And recovery is recovering from said toxic thing. Recovery is sometimes recovering from childhood wounds we didn't even know we had to recover. So the reality is the opposite of what? Fantasy, distortion. And so that's really part of a recovery, is recognizing, okay, where is my voice? So when you are getting out of a toxic relationship, especially from a partner who does not want to divorce you or does not want to let you go, that is his or her said reality. And when their reality is being threatened, they will try to say a lot of things to you so that you change reality. So there's a lot of things you can do in order to channel out, you know, and make sure you're not, you know, hearing that. But to really just, you know, start being aware of what your reality is, and what is ego saying to you? What is the distorted level of thinking? And that going back to your own perfection, you know exactly where you're supposed to be, and you know exactly. I've known to get out of a relationship many times,
Yeah.
and I didn't out of fear.
Yeah.
That's a distorted thought.
Yeah.
So you can do just everyone. I want everyone who's in this anything toxic to get out, because there's so much joy to be had in your life.
Takes work, but that's 100% true. Yeah, that definitely takes work. You know, I always tell people that because people say, well, it takes time. No, it takes time plus work, not one or the other, but both.
So true. I love that. I'm gonna steal that from you.
Yep, you got it. I'm stealing a lot of things from you as well too. So Lindsey, thank you very much. We're gonna have to do this again. We appreciate everything. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lindsey Ellison from lindseyellison.com. And this is Toxic Triumph. Thank you guys. And we will see you guys next week.